Some of you and many of your friends were raised being told that you were special. And you were told that you can have whatever you want just because you want it. Many schools gave participation ribbons. So in other words, kids got medals for coming in last. And the science on this is good. We know what it does is it devalues the feeling and the medal for the person who actually works hard to come in first, and it embarrasses the person who comes in last because they know they don't deserve it, and it makes them feel worse.
Information, do this, put your hands out. Information combined with emotion becomes a long-term memory. Long-term memory. How many people know this? How many people you hear a song and it'll take you back to when you were a child? Raise your hand. How many people it's not a song, but maybe it's a fragrance or a food that will take you back decades? Because information combined with emotion became a long-term memory, right? Because we're not logical, we're what? We don't do things logically all the time. We do things what? Emotionally, right? Because we're not logical, we're biological.
Some kids got into honors classes not because they deserved it, but because their parents complained. And some kids got A's not because they earned them, but because the teachers didn't want to deal with the parents. And then you graduate. And you get a job. And in an instant, your entire self-view is shattered. Because many kids find out that they're not special. They find out that they can't have whatever they want just because they want it. There's nothing when you come in last. You get no medal for coming in last, and your parents cannot help you get a promotion. And so what the result is an entire generation where there's a disproportionately high number of people growing up with lower self-confidence than previous generations, because this entire self-image is completely shattered instantaneously. And so much so that I actually hear stories of people's parents filling out their job applications for them.
We said that children are the fastest learners, right? That they have this curiosity and they play all the time. Let's see how many people here, raise your hand if you're willing to play. Now, it's been shown in science, the research, by playing more actually creates neurogenesis and neuroplasticity. What's neurogenesis? New growth, new brain cells. How many people like the idea of creating more new brain cells? What about neuroplasticity? What does that mean? More connections. So intelligence, in a way, is not necessarily, like Einstein didn't have a bigger brain than anyone here. Probably, it was actually less. He had a smaller brain. But in certain areas of his brain, he had highly connectedness. He did these thought experiments where he would put himself in these brainwave states, specifically theta state. The theta state of creativity. That's the state that you're in when you shower. How many people notice when you're showering, you come up with all these wonderful ideas? It's always when you can't write something down, right? And so that's the theta state. That's a relaxed state of creativity. You're inspired. You come up with new ideas. New things come out of you, right?
We know that social media and cell phones release dopamine. Now, we have age restrictions on alcohol, we have age restrictions on tobacco, and we have age restrictions on gambling, but we have no age restrictions on social media and cell phones. It's as if an entire generation who are going through adolescence, their parents have thrown open the liquor cabinet and said, try the vodka to help you get through the teenage years. That's what social media and cell phones do. So unfortunately, for too many people, that connection is becoming hardwired. And as they grow up, when they face significant stress in their lives, instead of learning to turn to a person, they turn to a device.
I remember recently, I got to introduce two of my modern-day superheroes. It was Richard Branson and Stan Lee. Like, who's not Stan Lee, but Stan Lee? Who's Stan Lee? Yeah, the co-creator of Spider-Man and X-Men and Avengers and Fantastic Four. And we're going to dinner. I remember asking Stan, I was like, I have to know, you've created all these incredible superheroes. Who's your favorite? And he looks at me without a blink. He's like, Iron Man. I'm like, that's awesome. And then he's like, Jim, who's your favorite superhero? And he had this Spider-Man tie, so I was like, Spider-Man. And without a pause, he says, with great power comes... And how do we all know that, right?
Right? And if you don't like the person, you don't have to learn to say no when you mean yes, and yes when you mean no, and yes when you just swipe left. It's done. In other words, the social skills aren't developing. And so there's an entire generation that's growing up with lower self-confidence, going into a workforce, having their self-image shattered, not knowing necessarily how to deal with all the stress that they're facing of growing up and starting a career and finding out where you fit and all of that good stuff. And instead of turning to a person, we're turning to devices. And the results are starting to show up in the statistics. We know that suicide is on the rise amongst this generation. We know that accidental death due to overdoses is on the rise amongst this generation. Depression is on the rise amongst this generation. Universities are suffering an epidemic where they're dealing with disproportionately high numbers of students than they've ever dealt with ever before, taking leaves of absence due to depression. And then to compound the effect, it's a generation that's grown up with filters.
And you're like, Jim, where's this exercise? Why am I standing the whole time? Does your physiology affect your psychology? Yes or yes? Because one of the best ways of changing your state is by moving your body, right? Because as your body moves, your brain grooves. As your body moves, your brain grooves. You create more neurogenesis, neuroplasticity. Actually, you know what supports it? Novelty. What helps you make more of these connections is novelty and nutrition, just like your body, right? You want to build a physical muscle, you give it what? You work it out, you give it exercise, you give it stimulus, novelty, and then you feed that muscle with nutrition. Same thing with your mental muscles.
They treat the sense of fulfillment or even love like it's a scavenger hunt, like it's something you look for. My millennial friends, they've gone through so many jobs. They're either getting fired, I mean it was mutual, or they're quitting because they're not making an impact, or they're not finding the thing they're looking for, they're not feeling fulfilled, as if it's a scavenger hunt.
Just believing that you can. Because if you believe you can or believe you can, either way you're right, because all behavior is belief-driven. There's no such thing as a good or bad memory. There is no such thing as a good or bad memory. There's just a trained memory and an untrained memory. Does that make sense? Now, here's the thing. I grew up with these learning challenges. I had all these difficulties all through school, all through elementary, middle school, junior high, high school. I had all of these challenges. At the age of 9, I remember a teacher looking at me thinking I wasn't either smart enough to understand what she was saying or wasn't paying attention. She was talking to another adult, and she said, "That's the boy with the broken brain." And I was like, at 9 years old, right? And so those kind of identity issues, those beliefs, does that make a difference? Yes, right? And a lot of people believe that they can't do certain things. They could just never remember names. So I could teach them a strategy, but if the belief is not changed, what happens? It's not, because it becomes self-fulfilling.
Love, a job you find joy from, is not something you discover. It's not like, I found love. Here it is. I found a job I love. That's not how it works. Both of those things require hard work. You are in love because you work very hard every single day of your life to stay in love. You find a job that brings you ultimate joy because you work hard every single day to serve those around you, and you maintain that joy. It's not a discovery. But the problem is this sense of impatience.
I remember running a marathon, and preparing for it, I read a chapter of one of the books, and it was on the psychology of running a marathon, right, the mental part. And it said this verbatim, word for word, because I'm a memory expert. It said, your brain is like a supercomputer, and your self-talk is a program it will run. So if you tell yourself you're not good at remembering names, you will not remember the name of the next person you meet because you programmed your supercomputer not to. Isn't that interesting? What I always tell people is this: you have to monitor your self-talk. Monitor your self-talk. If you go around tell people, oh, I have a horrible memory, I'm not smart enough, I'm getting too old, fill in the blank. First of all, if you fight for your limitations, you get to keep them. Does that make sense?